And I think the data is absolutely clear that children with intact two-parent families do far better. Now, if you get divorced, there are things you can do that moderate the effect of the divorce. What's his name? He wrote The Boy Crisis. Warren Farrell has documented a number of ways that people who get divorced can ensure that their children do about as well as they would in an intact family. And some of that involves approximately 50% contact with each parent. I think the parents also need to attend counseling, third-party counseling, so that they can maintain a reasonable relationship, and they have to live within something approximating a 20-minute drive from one another, something like that. But I mean, that takes a lot of balancing and dancing to replicate that environment. And it seems impossible in our society to have a discussion about the fact that some forms of families are better for children than others. And because we think of any imposition of a value analysis of that sort as discriminatory. And, you know, in some sense it is discriminatory, because when you say that one thing is better, you're also saying at the same time that the opposite of that is worse. Well, then it depends on who you're trying to focus on. And well, I go by the data fundamentally. And, you know, children born to young single mothers, especially if the young single mothers are troubled and therefore also easy targets for predatory males, they don't do well, and there's multi-generational effects of that. And we're too bloody naive and I don't know, immature, I guess, to have a serious conversation about such things. And we also don't know how to put the genie back in the bottle. But there's no tax break, for example, for stable married couples. So there's no economic policy that supports it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not entirely sure that would even change much. I mean, I think this is much more of a cultural issue than an economic issue. I mean, you know, a lot of people say, well, it's kind of interesting how many different excuses are produced for this. I mean, like you said, a lot of people say that it's this patriarchal institution, but then why are the rich getting married more than the poor?
Well, I don't even know what that means. Let's talk about that for a minute. I mean,
sure.
I suppose that claim is grounded in the historical interpretation that in the past, women were treated in some sense as the equivalent of property. And now, whether or not that's a reasonable interpretation of the past is entirely up for debate, although we could say that it was more true 150 years ago than it is now. But we could also point out that birth control was a lot less reliable. Yeah. And so the relationships between men and women didn't have the freedom they have today for all sorts of reasons, hygienic reasons for that matter. I mean, one of the things that freed women was the easy access to technology that dealt with menstrual cycle and public toilets and all of that. I mean, we just don't understand how much sanitary technology, for example, is built into the infrastructure, as well as safety, because women can walk down the street unaccompanied without any problem, comparatively speaking. We don't understand how much of that has changed the relationship between the sexes. And so there may have been property-like associations with marriage 150 years ago. But first of all, that doesn't necessarily mean that that was a patriarchal institution. I mean, it was still the case that the idea was that the men would stick around and provide economic support and care for the children. And that's a long-term binding contract. And it seems to me the opposite in some sense of libertine freedom. So where's the patriarchy in that precisely? I mean, women weren't equal in some sense, but there are reasons for that.
I mean, many people have made the argument that by loosening the norms around marriage, it's actually been to the benefit of men in some sense, you know, to be able to have lots of promiscuous partners with many different women and perhaps impregnate some of them and not have to stick around. There's no obligation to them beyond producing child support payment.
So that means that it's advantageous to psychopathic men.
Right, dark triad types.
Well, exactly, because, you know, the hallmark of psychopathy is short-term advantage taken by a given individual without care for anyone else. And it certainly seems to me like dating apps like Tinder. Now, I don't want to call every male who's successful on Tinder a psychopath. I'm not saying that. But I would say that it isn't obvious to me at all that if you're a successful polyamorous male on Tinder, and so that's going to be a very tiny subset of men, they're hyper-selected by women, a tiny subset of men who receive almost no rejection, they're set up to learn to be psychopathic because all their interactions with other people can be devoted to short-term sexual gratification with no emotional intimacy or long-term commitment. And that's a hell of a training ground as far as I'm concerned. It depends on what you want for a society, but as you said, even the affluent women who profess a desire for polyamory, which is complete bloody rubbish in my estimation and completely underestimates the economic consequences of sex, they still dream of the fairy tale princess who meets the prince who, wakes her up with a kiss and are married happily ever after. So it's such bloody nonsense. We allow our culture to be run by the pathetic fantasies of immature adolescent delusion, fundamentally, as far as I can tell.
If you've been listening to my dad's podcasts, you know that I've been taking Elysium Health's NAD supplement called Basis. I like it. I wanted to talk to you guys about their second supplement, Matter, a brain aging supplement developed in partnership with the University of Oxford. They have dozens of the world's best scientists working with them, and 8 of them are Nobel Prize winners. Matter is supposed to slow the brain loss that's associated with memory decline as we get older and start forgetting things. Starting in our 30s, our brains actually begin to shrink. It happens to all of us, even if you're healthy. You lose brain mass. This affects memory, learning, and even physical activity. Lifestyle choices like drinking, smoking, diet, and sleeping badly can also accelerate the process. A ridiculously large portion of the population in America in particular is deficient in vitamins like B vitamins, and Matter can help with that. Matter is patented and clinically proven to slow the age-related loss in the brain's memory centers by an average of 86%. That's insane. If you already take a typical omega-3 and it's just the type that comes from a random drugstore, I do recommend switching to Matter, which contains a really healthy omega-3, 4 times more absorbable than standard omega. Plus, really, most omega and fish oils that you just buy randomly are actually rancid and really bad for you. You have to be super picky about anything that has omegas in it. Many Matter customers have reported improvements in memory and cognition. Obviously, your results may vary. I'm sure we all want our brains to continue functioning optimally for as long as possible. You have absolutely nothing without your health. Take it from me. So we have a special offer for JBP listeners.